Every now and then, people get caught telling the truth. Was that the case here?
Well, certainly, I doubt that it was just an unprepared remark. Chinese diplomats wouldn't say things like that if they thought they couldn't. So, yeah, I mean, I think that reflects, of course, Putin's position that none of these countries are truly sovereign. The only teaser here is, did the ambassador mean also Russia because it's a post-Soviet state? I don't think that's what he meant in his remarks.
Mm-hmm. But Angela, and good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. Did Emmanuel Macron open up potentially this kind of rhetoric, given Xi Jinping is really viewing his trip to China as a massive coup?
Yes, I mean, the fact that Macron went there, he talked about strategic autonomy for Europe. He said that Europe shouldn't necessarily do what the US does in all of these conflicts. I mean, he came away from there annoying most of the other European Union countries because of what he appeared to have conceded to Xi Jinping. So I think he probably did open it up for that.
I said WhatsApp. It was actually a WeChat account where the transcript of that interview had been posted, Angela. Isn't that exactly, though, what President Xi is likely saying when he meets with foreign leaders?
I would think so. We know that he and Putin spent 4 hours when he went to Moscow just with their interpreters. One wonders what they discussed there. And I'm sure that that's what he said to other European leaders. And that really makes one question whether China could really be a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine conflict if those are his views.
Yeah, and also Xi Jinping has yet to call Volodymyr Zelensky, although he did make this in-person trip to sit down with Putin in Moscow. Angela, I also want to talk to you about what's going on in Sudan. You have the United States suspending its operation at the embassy in Sudan. You also have the evacuation of this personnel. At the same time, you have the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying he's concerned about the Wagner Group in Sudan. And the Washington Post over the weekend, in some of these leaks, is just talking about how the Wagner Group is trying to have a collective anti-Western alliance amongst a number of African states. How quickly and how much is Putin making inroads in Africa?
Well, I think we've all been a little asleep at the wheel. He's made quite rapid inroads, even since 2019, when he had the first post-Soviet Russia-Africa summit in the city of Sochi. Wagner has been very active for a number of years in a number of countries, supporting different authoritarian leaders, making lots of money on the natural resources of Africa. And in Sudan, we know that the Russian government would like to have a naval base there, a warm water port. They've been pushing for that. And Wagner has been very active in Sudan over the years, supporting different leaders, again, making money, interfering. Wagner is also very good at this kind of election disinformation, interfering in the local politics. And so I think what's interesting at the moment is to see how it comes out in this current civil war that's just begun, because it was supporting one side, but now it looks as if maybe it's going to wait and see who the winner is, and then, intensify ties with the winner.
Annmarie mentioned the Secretary of State. Here's what Antony Blinken had to say about this situation in Sudan.
A decision to suspend operations at the embassy, remove our personnel from their assigned posts, is among the most difficult that any secretary has to make. But my first priority is the safety of our people, and I determined that the deteriorating security conditions in Khartoum posed an unacceptable risk to keeping our team there at this time.
Angela, Stent, it was suggested that Russia was watching and learning as the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. I know this is a very different scenario. Is it one that Putin is still learning from?
I think they're still learning from it. I mean, he miscalculated Putin because he partly started the war with Ukraine because he thought the U.S. wouldn't do anything given what happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But now I think the Russians are watching. And if there's less U.S. presence in Sudan, my guess is that Wagner and the Russian government will step in, will try and fill the void. This is a story that even during this year of war in Ukraine, Russia has really increased its presence in many parts of Africa.
So is Putin succeeding, at least in some parts of the world, to continue to divide the world? So they are pushing back on the U.S. We also saw this recently with a trip from Brazilian President Lula to Xi Jinping, saying that the U.S. should be wanting a peace agreement, should come on the side almost of Beijing.
Right, and Lula even said that both sides were responsible for the war, which is a proposition that I think much of the world would not accept. No, I think the story partly of the Russia-Ukraine war is the extent to which the West has sought to isolate Putin and has partly succeeded, but that the global South, as we call it, has not gone along with that. Even if you look at the UN votes, the number of countries that have abstained from condemning Russia, none of them have sanctioned Russia, and many of them want to remain neutral in this conflict. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that as a result of this war, Putin is isolated. He's isolated from the West, but he's not isolated from the rest of the world.
Bring us inside Russia while you're with us, Angela Stent, and popular opinion about the war in Ukraine. What are people saying?
Well, you know, we don't have very good information. We have anecdotal information. We have polling, and the one independent pollster that really remains that shows that the majority of Russians still support the war, if we can believe the polling. But the polling also shows that about half of Russians think that there should be negotiations. But so far, Putin seems to have persuaded the Russian population that they're under siege from the United States and NATO, that we're trying to take Russia over, cause regime change or whatever, and that they have to support this effort, that they're fighting World War II all over again. But, you know, and the US and NATO are essentially Nazi Germany. The Russians that don't support the war have largely left. 1 million of them have left since the war began. And those that remain in Russia appear to at least passively support the war.